I'd like to welcome you all to this session that promises to be very, very interesting. I just want to, before we start, I just want to say that Neha's book, The Many Lives of Syeda X, is actually a work of non-fiction. And of course, Professor Kumar's book, Thank You, Gandhi, is a work of faction, and more about it very soon. Um, Professor Kumar and Neha, your books have recently been published to great acclaim. So let's start by both of you telling us a bit about your books and why you wrote them. So Neha, if you'd like to go first.
Thank you, Swati. Very happy to be here. Uh, my book, essentially, I'm a journalist. I've been a journalist for the last 18 years. So the book started with the idea where in one of the corporate media newsrooms, I was being told that from now on, our target audience is going to be the urban rich. So stop doing Jhola Wala bleeding heart stories. And so it started with that frustration. And I was also told categorically that women do not watch television news. And so obviously you cannot do a story on malnutrition at prime time because that's going to mess with the buying mood of the viewer who is going to buy all the kitchen appliances and modular kitchens that are going to be advertised in the break. So it started with that, but the book essentially is unlike Kolkata and Mumbai, Delhi has a huge working class population and small and medium industries. My book, Syeda, is about a person who was a weaver in Banaras. And after the demolition of the Babri mosque in the 90s, her loom was burned down, and that's when she moved to Delhi as a migrant worker. And in the last 30 years, she had done 50 jobs. And why I talk about this is because in India, most of the women are employed in the agriculture sector, but after the agriculture sector, women are employed in this informal home-based economy. So Syeda in the last 50 years, from starting out as a weaver in Banaras, has made pressure cooker parts, helmet parts, packaged stationeries, packaged almonds that come from North America, and all of these things. And the fact that every year we have these reports that say that the female labor force participation is going down. But wherever you look across, you see women working. And so then how there is a disconnect between what is being considered work and what is actually happening is something that I also look at. And the other things that also in the last 9 years of working on the book, I realized that a lot of things that Syeda was doing were running parallel with what is happening in the country in terms of the widening inequality, the growth in urban poverty, the kind of majoritarianism that is around us, the kind of violence, migration. All of those things come together in her life and in the life of her children. For example, her daughter, who's now a mall worker, and what happens inside a mall. And eventually, in the 2020 riots in Delhi, again, she's affected because of her Muslim identity, but also the identity of a worker in Delhi. So that is essentially what one is looking at in the book, Swati.
Thanks, Neha. Professor Kumar, would you like to tell us a bit about your book, Thank You, Gandhi, and why you wrote it?
Thank you. This book had several lives, so to say. Towards the year that COVID began, I had already, in a sense, completed some research on Gandhi, which I had been trying to do for a long time. And then when COVID began, something else happened to me and the nation. And actually, I saw a different kind of book. It sounds strange to say, in a dream, and then started all over again. This book is a mixture, you can say, of three parallel stories. One is a story of two friends who went to the same primary school long ago, soon after independence. And they remained friends to our times, to this time, when one of them passes away and leaves a manuscript with the surviving friend. It's a story like the end of Hamlet, where Hamlet says to Horatio, "You must live to tell my story. And that's more or less how this friend assigns to his surviving friend a manuscript which he could not complete. And it's kind of very scattered. He's not a writer, he was a civil servant. And this other friend then has to struggle with that manuscript to prepare it for the kinds of times we face around us, when not every book can be published without a lot of editing and whatnot. So that is one story. The other story is about India as it has changed since their childhood to this point. And that's a story that both of them tell in a strange work of a dialogue in which somebody has died and somebody else is still living. And then there is a third story of Gandhi, with whom both of them were somewhat acquainted because he had died before they were born. He had been killed before they were born. And yet he was a presence in their lives for one reason or another since their primary school days. And during this period when life seems to have become quite unbearable for writers, teachers, intellectuals, and so on, they moved back towards Gandhi in a way. And it seems Gandhi is still available to them to give them shelter, you might say. So, your question, why did I write this book? I think the book happened. There is no particular reason why it got written at this point. It just happened like that. And here it is. Those of you who will want to see it, it's a story of a slightly different kind. That's why this classification problem that publishers have. Is it fiction? Is it non-fiction? So I like the word faction, but I'm not very fond of factions. So let's see who treats it as what.
So I think I'll ask you a follow-up question and then I'll go to Neha. You mentioned that this book is faction, which is essentially, the textbook definition is that it's a mixture of fiction and facts. So facts that have been fictionalized in a way. Now, as somebody who works mostly with nonfiction, I'm very intrigued, by why did you use the fictionalizing bit? Why could the story or the things that you were saying not be told in a non-fiction format? What did fictionalizing bring to the book and to your storytelling?
There are times when fiction looks like truth and seems to be the only way in which truth can be told. And these are times like that in a way, although I know Neha has published a non-fiction book, which is full of, to my mind, things that are a kind of fiction about lives that seem impossible to us. So this classification itself is quite problematic, I think, now. And this genre of mixing fiction and non-fiction is not entirely new, not certainly in Hindi. Janendra Kumar, a writer of the 1950s, 60s, wrote precisely this kind of book called Tyag Patra, where the book starts with a judge who is fed up with his life as a judge. And he wants to tell the story of his Bua, who suffered so much. And he says, I have resigned from my post today so that I can write about my Bua in a fair manner without worrying about what verdict I would have passed if her case had come to me. Now that you can say ability to stir your emotions, non-fiction unfortunately mostly doesn't allow that stirring to happen. In fact, you are supposed to keep cool despite the horror that you want to describe. Whereas fiction grips you and therefore is more attractive. But I said to you, I didn't choose it as such. I actually saw it in a dream. And it looked just right to talk about Gandhi today and make him come alive.
Neha, through Saida's life, as narrated in your book, we get a glimpse of how the events of the last 30 years, let's say, have led us to the point where we are today as a nation. So, would you like to say a bit about that?
Yeah, and definitely I also want to add to what Professor Kumar was saying. Like, for instance, Saida, she's done 50 jobs. And sometimes that's why nomenclature or the categorization any longer does not work. For example, when I started going to a number of uh, uh, industrial units or industrial areas in Delhi, when you go to women and ask them, do you work? And they say, no, I don't. And then you say, no, but you are stitching these footballs and you are pasting these bindis. You're working. And they say, no, this is just to buy milk for today or to buy groceries. And so there are two things to it. One is the fact that a lot of home based workers, till 2008, we did not even acknowledge that there is this huge economy. But even when surveys are done, how do you classify this work? For example, Saida, in spite of working 12 to 16 hours a day, has never managed to make more than 1/5 of the daily wage. But at the same time, for 3 weeks, she's making tea strainers. For a month, she's rolling agarbattis. Then for 3 months, she's making cycle brake wires. So technically, the government or the policymakers would look at work as skilled, semi-skilled, or unskilled. But a person is supposed, is this a person who's making cycle brake wires and then packaging almonds and then making election campaign material within a span of 3 months without any training is a highly skilled person. So also sometimes the categorization and the nomenclature also does not work. But coming back to the question that you asked, in the last 30 years, for example, like I said, I, as a journalist, I have reported quite a bit on majoritarianism. I have reported on human rights violations. I've reported on environment. But when I started reporting on Saida's life, for example, a lot of these things for me as a journalist, it was an opportunity to weave in all these things together, various intersections of caste, class, gender, environment, geographies, all of that. But at the same time, also the possibility to see that if there is majoritarianism in the 90s, and now we talk about it in 2025, how have we moved to this point? What has happened? And through Saida's life, for example, if I simply talk about her marginalization as a Muslim working class woman, the fact that she was a highly skilled weaver, the fact that her husband was a highly skilled weaver, but the husband was reduced to being a porter in Delhi, or she is being reduced to pasting bindis, which is not really the kind of work that she enjoys, or the fact that the kind of socio-economic marginalization that has sort of happened in the last 30 years, or the opening of the markets, right? The fact that the rise of Hindu nationalism also started, it was parallel with the opening of the markets. So, which is why you could marginalize people on the basis of their religious identity, but at the same time, on the ground, there was a lot of competition amongst people for, to survive and to compete for resources. So that was also her life. Then I also look at, for example, her son's life. So Saida has 3 children, Shazib, Salman, and Reshma. So because I was working on it for a long time, for 4 years, like I told you, I did not know that she had one more son. And then one day she said that, yeah, my son ran away with someone who had done black magic on him. And I was suddenly intrigued. I said, what is this story? And basically she said that he was in love with a Hindu woman and they had to flee for their life because there was this whole propaganda theory about love jihad that was being used against them. And those who are not familiar with love jihad, I would say that it's like the best example of mansplaining, because it basically says that Hindu women have no brains, so which is why if you just flash a bike and a cell phone and sunglasses, they are just going to fall in love and run away with you. So basically that happened with Shazib, and he had to leave. Similarly, like I said, Salman, the other son, who was actually named after Salman Khan and wanted to be this really cool guy, but never managed to be that guy. And how he was every time, for example, in school in 2002, when the Gujarat riots happened, There were all these CDs that were circulated about the riots and the train and everything, and how some random child in Delhi walks up to him in school and says, Salman, why did you set the train on fire? And Salman, because he wants to be the school guy, he's like, yeah, I did, without knowing the context, and then he gets beaten up. So there are things that happen, you know, at a distance, but how do they affect people on the ground? Or the fact that when the Right to Education Act was passed, it happened, but it took some time for it to be implemented, and how immediately it did not have an impact in Saida's life. Or the fact that when the Aadhaar card came in, or right now we keep talking about digital India and says, oh, digital India is going to fix everything, the kind of impact it has on the people on the ground. For the fact that Reshma, after leaving her work in the mall, she started working at a digital Seva Kendra, and how everybody was sort of scrambling to get, for example, a lot of people go to the PDS ration shops and they have to give their fingerprints. But a lot of people who do hard labor, their fingerprints go away, which means that you cannot get ration, and which means they're going to send an OTP to a phone number you registered 10 years back, which you may not have, which means you are not going to get that bare minimum ration that is going to take care of your things. So these are the things are sort of parallel, and how they play up in people's lives is something, it was very important for me to understand where we are in terms of our conversations on class, on caste, on majoritarianism, and even in terms of gender.
Professor Kumar, I think this is a very good point in terms of your book as well, because in your book, one of the core tensions is that there seems to be this, or there is a dichotomy between Gandhi and his idea of India and India, the country's journey and where it is actually today. I mean, there is a dichotomy between the two. So, would you like to say something about what you think of Gandhi's relevance or irrelevance today in the light of what Neha has told us of what people's lives are?
See, when Gandhi was killed, it seemed as if that's the end of his story, except as a statue here and there, and except as excerpts from his books in textbooks. But that has not proved the case. And therefore, the question of his relevance or irrelevance doesn't actually arise, because he is living, he is with us. Look at the farmers' agitation in Punjab. One whole year of sitting on a busy road and continuously practicing non-violence. How do you explain it? Whereas, in fact, in Punjab, Bhagat Singh is far greater an object of veneration than Gandhi for various historical reasons. And Bhagat Singh's own niece addressed that crowd, which was sitting in this remarkable mode, which you can only call a residue of Gandhi in Punjab. And there are so many other ways in which you can see. I would say every act of resistance is the presence of Gandhi, is a mark of Gandhi's presence. His footprint is all over the place. And we don't have to kind of look back or read, I mean, one should read Gandhi, but we don't have to read him to find him in our midst. In so many ways, he's around. And what stirs these two friends to work on a story of Gandhi, which one has left for the other to complete, is precisely that thread between them. Both of them have found coherence in their lives because of their memory of Gandhi, or how they understood Gandhi as a child. And they're grateful to him. That's why the book is called Thank You, Gandhi, for giving coherence to our lives. To this point, when one has ended his life, the other is about to end his life. And so, I mean, I think the question of Gandhi doesn't invite the problem of relevance. In fact, the problem today is stereotypes of Gandhi, especially the stereotypes that are encased in these two words, truth and non-violence. When I was researching on Gandhi, I discovered that this is quite a sort of a strange and scattered way of thinking about Gandhi, that he stood for truth and non-violence. In fact, what you discover when you sit back and reflect on Gandhi is that he was talking about violence being a condition which makes truth impossible. Because violence breeds fear, and when there is fear, there is no scope for truth. So actually, Gandhi is more complex than simply these two, slogans that are often repeated in his name. We are talking about a more complex historical figure, and then we are talking about a more complex philosopher, somebody who now doesn't need a context. And the context of the freedom struggle is long over. And he's free of context. He belongs to the world that we face today in every sector that you mentioned and you mentioned, whether it's environment, climate change and all, or it's violence and wars, or whether it's exploitation of women and labor force. Gandhi is all over the place. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the core concerns that the Mahatma had was for pluralism and for ensuring that India remained a pluralistic society. And Neha, in your book, through Saida's life, there is something else that emerges, though, that even though the conversation today is so much about pluralism and secularism, we see in Saida's life that her identity as a Muslim is sometimes, not as important to her as her identity as a woman, as a breadwinner, as somebody who works and earns, and how she's able to take care of her family. So a focus on pluralism itself is almost meaningless to her without a parallel focus on, her economic status and her class and so on. So would you like to comment on this?
Let me tell you with an observation. When I initially started going to a lot of working class areas around Delhi, every evening I would see that people would come back and they would basically make potato curry and have it with roti or rice and do like a small seasoning with a little oil tadka. In the last 3-4 years, I have seen the same families. What they do now is that they boil the potatoes, put some salt, something, and have it with rice and salt. And when they serve that to the children, they put few drops of oil in that bowl because edible oil is so expensive. And so why I talk about this is because this is the example of what people are living through every day. Syeda, who's never made more than 80, 90, 100 rupees, 120 rupees per day, when I asked her that how you were, her loom was burned down in Banaras, her house was again burned down in the Delhi riots. What is her thought about this? And she said that, I don't wake up every possible day thinking about how to defeat the extremists. I think about how to survive this day. And for me, it was also kind of important to understand because all of us, maybe I am, because of my class or caste privilege, I can afford to have a politically correct position on something, which may not be a luxury available to a lot of people, including Syeda, where she wants to, if her life every day is about how to survive, is there any scope to think about the larger questions? And which is why it brings me back to what you asked, which is questions of pluralism are absolutely, absolutely important. But if we do not marry questions of caste, class, gender with them, they are going to be very elite conversations and will not include and which are not going to serve the purpose that they are there for. Which is why I just feel like Professor Kumar mentioned the farmers' protest, or there was Shaheen Bagh. In the last 10 years, we've seen several protests. Right now, as we speak, the Maruti workers are on strike. We've seen so many gig workers, Amazon workers recently on strike. But those questions do not become, they are not discussed as much as the question of pluralism. So mind me, I'm not saying this is not important, but if you do not marry these two, then you're obviously alienating a huge and majority of the people that we are speaking about. So that's why through this book also, I'll give you another example. For example, Syeda does not have a very politically correct response to sexual harassment. She says each time you ask about sexual harassment in these small sweatshops, which she hates the word because she says all these activist types come and call it sweatshops, but it's actually a factory, it's my factory, so don't you tell. So there are all those divides. And I asked her what happens when there is sexual harassment. And she has a very tutored, rehearsed response, which some people say patriarchal, and it is in some way, but it also protects her. She says it is on the woman. Now, if you start having a very woke conversation around it, of course, she'll be cancelled. But at the same time, if the choice is between surviving that day and buying milk and getting work and taking a politically correct position, there's a huge gap that we have to work towards to build. So,
Professor Kumar, would you like to respond to this question from a Gandhian perspective? You know, this whole pluralism and how to get through the day. I mean, what would Gandhi say?
Pluralism is it's all about the question of how you look at or how you construct the other, and how much you show not just tolerance as a political quality, but genuine sense of concern for who you regard as the other. And Gandhi not only stands for that as a symbol, and as somebody who died for it, you might say, but he puts it into a kind of an eternal value framework, not just for India, for the world in a way. So in that sense, even if pluralism today looks an injured value, a bruised value in our setup, and in many other countries, it looks like a kind of a value which is gasping for breath. But then that happens to values in many time frames. History moves on and brings back so much. Just today we saw a presentation on the paintings in the Ajanta, which are about compassion, how faces express that. And 2000 years ago. And today, probably we need to be reminded that this is not some value created during the freedom struggle by so-and-so.
Of course, sorry to interrupt you, but it's also about the marrying of the two debates, that one cannot see pluralism as, let's say, a virtue on its own, that we have to look at the economic life of the person who is, of the people who are at the receiving end of communal violence and so on.
No, absolutely. In fact, that's why my book chooses fiction as a way to bring out the qualities that right now are at a receiving end. And I agree with Neha as well, and that pluralism is not something up there as an elite quality, or secularism up there as a quality that state must show. These are all grounded issues among us. And even the civil servant, who's the IAS officer, who's the protagonist of the story, he realizes that, how he has contributed to this change in India. In fact, this is the story of his redemption in a very moral sense. When he's emotionally so depressed, he discovers that he too has contributed. We have all contributed to bringing our country where it is today. And therefore, some degree of not only one's own role in this, but also in this abstraction of values that we are used to living in now, especially those who speak the language of academia or intellectuals or as writers. We have partly created this abstract monster of values where so little is practiced and so much is talked about. And the politicians have all learnt it from us in a way. And our redemption would also lie where this protagonist of my story found redemption in realizing his own role.
One of the things that, Neha, that strikes us about your book is that there are so few narratives that are written on documenting the working class. There are some, of course, like Aman Sethi's A Free Man and Snigdha Poonam's Dreamers, and there are a few more. But you said something interesting. You said that writing and documenting the lives of the working class has a lot to do with power and powerlessness. So could you just talk about that a little bit?
Thank you for that question, because see how history, for example, Delhi, right? Each time I did not grow up in Delhi, but when I came to Delhi, all the conversation was about people in the power corridors, right? So whether it was the Mughal history and the Chandni Chowk ka Khana and the Chandni Chowk ki Galiya and all of that, or it was about people in power right now who are running the government. But who are the people? And right now we are sitting in Jaipur and we see all these fabulous monuments and history and all of that. But who are the people who have been documented in this history? Not the people who have made these monuments, but the people who have commissioned that work. And the same thing applies here, because for Syeda, a lot of things that, I'll give you an example, because once I was sitting with Syeda and I was, very dutifully trying to make a list of, okay, what all things have you done? And after a point, she got really irritated and she said that, are you going to ask a construction worker how many houses, what were the addresses, how much was he paid, and who are the owners? And the same thing applies to me. But the other thing also is for example, Shahzeb, her son, number of times he was detained by the police, and because, so like I said, that love jihad thing happened. Once there have been incarceration of a lot of young Muslim men, particularly migrant Muslim men, to the point that in a lot of working class areas they say that Delhi has become a place where young men from UP and Bihar come and they disappear, because the police, each time they have to solve a case, they pick up people and there is incarceration, but there is no documentation because it's not noted down in a police diary. It's not, the torture is not there. And so I do feel that at two levels, the people who hold power do not document this, because the moment you start documenting what is happening with people who do not have power, you will be held accountable, which means there has to be, you have to say something, why is this happening? You have to give answers. And so, and the other thing also is that because at a daily level there is so much of violation and there is so much of marginalization that nobody thinks that this is important in the larger sort of framework of a thing that you're researching on. So to me, at that point, what was very helpful is understanding how a lot of oral histories have been recorded. So the fact that Syeda is saying that I was rolling agarbattis using cow urine products, that in itself is very important to me, because some people want to sell cow urine products for their religious purity and whatever, but basically people who are making it are part of something that does not. So the kind of contradictions that exist are not recorded, and which is why it was really important.
Thank you. I think we can take a few questions. I have lots more questions for you both, but let's see if there are any questions from the audience.
Ma'am, my question is to you. If someone wants to write more non-fiction, I love doing it as a hobby. So, what are your suggestions or recommendations for that person?
Okay, I'm not a good, I'm not an expert. This is my first book. But what has really worked for me is that to be able to sit and put your ideas on on a document. And what has helped me initially is each time I have an idea, I put it in the document, and when I have it, I automatically start ideating around it. And so put that, once the book proposal is ready and somebody's sitting on your head to deliver, then it happens. So that's how it has worked for me. I don't have great other tips.
Yes, please.
Thank you for such a wonderful panel. Extremely insightful viewpoints. My question is to you, Ms. Dixit. While you're writing about such a complicated character, who is an actual person, given that it's nonfiction, she touches on so many complicated issues in today's India. How difficult is it to remain true to her story uh, and try to tell her story as purely as you can, instead of trying to highlight so many other things that you could talk about, given such a rich life that she's actually gone through and experienced?
Thank you for that question. In the last 9 years, with her understanding of things, I have also kind of become more, what you say, aware of what is happening and how I am thinking in a very regimented manner. So, for example, a lot of things that I think this should have been the response, like I said, for example, sexual harassment or whatever, that hasn't been the case. Or the fact that Syeda also is a very complex person. Let me give you an example. We talk about pluralism, and we talk about how a particular religious political ideology would like to think of the other in a particular way. But Syeda herself, being a Banarsi Muslim, she also has stereotypes, and she also disses like the Bengali Muslims who eat mustard oil, or she has theories about Rohingya Muslims, or she has theories about the Western UP Muslims. Or the fact that how Syeda, as a worker, she struggled quite a bit, but she's also patriarchal. So one day when I was speaking to her, her daughter, each time she used to assist Syeda in her work, and after 2-3 years, Reshma was very distant. And one day she said, "Oh, you are in awe of my mother? Let me tell you how my mother is like." And then she said, "Listen, she used to buy birthday cakes for my brothers, but she always made halwa for me." And to the point that I am the person who always studied, I completed school, and my brothers were busy romancing other people and doing whatever. But her heart was so small that she could never acknowledge that how I am the one who's always helped. So Saida's own patriarchy, Saida's own complexity, Saida's own stereotypes, as much as I would have liked, and all of us like, to have very pure, perfect people to write about, she was not like that. So I tried to put that also in the book.
Professor Kumar, I have a question for you now. One of the very intriguing parts of your book is the concept of friendship extending beyond life. One friend lives, the other friend dies. How does friendship exist in that space? If you'd like to say something.
I'm glad you asked that question because, in India, we talk about family, we talk about kinship. Our matrimonies are all about between families and so on, and of course, caste, etc. Friendship as an idea transcends family, transcends all of these others. Friendship is, especially friendships born in the pursuit of knowledge, like in a university campus, in this case in a primary school, belongs to a different level of relationship. And in this book, that friendship, which has lasted for 60 years, 65 years, hasn't died, hasn't become least affected by aging and other things. So it acquires a certain glow of its own as a human value, because all these other things are open to questioning. Quarrels happen within families in kinship, but a friendship between two friends is something rare, something above all this. And as you will read the book and enjoy the warmth of the friendship, which continues after one friend's death, you would think you are in a different space altogether, where this friend who is left over, who in fact is jealous of his friend who has died, because he doesn't have to face the day-to-day life and its various battles and horrors now. He feels a bit jealous, and yet he has to perform this posthumous duty of making his book publishable. So in that sense, it's a very difficult task that his friend has left him. He can't say, "Look, I'm struggling with your manuscript. You have never written a word. How do I present it to the world like this?" And yet he performs that duty with a sense of great warmth and love for his old childhood friend who has passed away in COVID. Thank you.
We're almost out of time, but there's one last question that I would like the both of you to respond. If the Mahatma was here today, what would he say to Syeda And what would Syeda say to him? If both of you could just, we could end on this note.
You have to take off. I think Gandhi would have said to Syeda, fight. Marjorie Sykes wrote with Jahangir Patel a book about Gandhi. She worked with Gandhi, and the title of that book is The Gift of the Fight. And that's what Gandhi has given us, apart from all the other things that he means to us as Indians. That if you want to be yourself, that means you must resist. And that is the meaning of identity in this greater sense, that you find yourself when you resist, no matter where you are, who you are, what you are facing. And that's the kind of a, not a message, but something you pick up from Gandhi the moment you think about him, read even a page of Gandhi from any part of his life. So that's what I think he would say to her.
And what would Syeda say to him?
Syeda would have told Gandhi how his idea of Ram Rajya, which was supposed to be a perfect state built on the welfare of people, regardless of their religious identity and the kind of nationalism that he spoke about, which was about welfare of people, how it has been twisted again and again and again to marginalize people on the basis of their religious identity, their caste identity, their gender identity, and how his ideas of, Swadeshi, handlooms, workers, locally sourcing things, how all of them are becoming cool without including people like Syeda. So she would have spoken about how those ideas exist. His ideas are very relevant, but they have been twisted to people's advantages.
So she would have given him some news.
Thank you both, and thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Thank you.